Withholding. Practically everyone who knows concedes that the federal income tax system is an appalling mess of inequities. It stifles initiative, wastes human energy, distorts the national economy, and generally has a corrupting and debasing effect on taxpayers. The system is wrong in concept and cannot be reformed. It must be abolished. This is difficult to accomplish because the withholding law conceals from a majority of taxpayers full realization of how burdensome and corrupt the income tax system is. If Congress would repeal withholding, millions of wage earners would suddenly become aware. But because withholding effectively hides the evils, there is not even enough public demand to get the withholding law repealed. Private employers now have a plan which will help educate wage earners about federal taxes. That is a summary of my report on withholding. Stop withholding. The full report after a message from my sponsor. 50 years ago, when the states of the Union were debating the question of approving the 16th Constitutional Amendment, which would permit the federal government to levy a direct income tax on the people, Richard Byrd of Virginia predicted that such a tax would give federal officials a stranglehold on the nation's business to harass, dictate, blackmail, and play favorites with taxpayers at the whim of officialdom. That condition has long since arrived. Everyone who knows concedes that the federal income tax system is an appalling mess of complicated inequities. It stifles initiative, wastes human energy and resources, distorts the national economy, and has a corrupting and debasing effect on taxpayers. But the complexities and tug of special interests make any sensible reform impossible. The system is wrong in concept and wrong in practice. It cannot be reformed. It must be abolished. Public support for repeal of the 16th Amendment is growing, but not fast enough, because millions of low and middle-income wage earners who carry most of the crushing tax load do not realize that they are carrying it. The withholding law is clearly unconstitutional. When an employer is forced to serve as tax collector and bookkeeper for the government, without payment for his time and expense and under threat of severe penalty for error in observing complicated and profuse administrative rules and requirements, most certainly involuntary servitude has been imposed on him by government in violation of the 13th Amendment, which prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude. If you compel employers to deduct money from employees' paychecks for taxes that are not due when the deductions are made, and if, as is the case with more than half of all wage earners, you compel the deduction of more money than the employee will owe when his taxes are due, you certainly are depriving those employees of their property without due process of law in violation of the Fifth Amendment. But, though obviously violating fundamental provisions of our Constitution, and though adopted as a temporary emergency measure during World War II, the withholding law has remained a permanent an indispensable feature of the federal income tax system because it proved to be a perfect means of placing the stigma and the expense of tax collecting on employers rather than on government. And it helped enormously in eliminating popular complaints against high and rising taxes because workers were far less aware that taxes were high and rising. A man does not have to save and manage so that at the end of the year, he can give government 25% or 40% or 50% of his earnings for the whole year. All of that has been done by the employer at the employer's expense. The average worker pays little attention to tax deductions from his paycheck. He adjusts himself to take-home pay. If that sum is insufficient, he and his family resent the employer, not government. They do not demand lower taxes, they demand higher wages. The withholding tax system can indeed make taxes pleasant. Internal Revenue Service schedules require employers to deduct, more often than not, more taxes than the employee will owe. At the end of the year, government sends the employee a rebate, a bonus, bigger in millions of cases than any bonus the employer can give. Thus, beneficent government gives back to workers a portion of the money which employers took away from them. The withholding tax conceals from the employees that it is the federal tax grab which keeps their take-home pay low. A majority of American taxpayers are thus kept from full realization that they are being forced to pay for extravagance, waste, corruption, and subsidies to foreign dictators. Throughout the United States, employers have for years tried to find some means of showing employees how they are being robbed by federal taxes. Some employers distribute special notices with all paychecks, calling attention to how much the federal government has compelled the employer to take away from the employees, and enumerating some of the preposterous and harmful federal programs that the employees' money is paying for. Some employers pay employees their full wages at one window, requiring them to go to another window and pay back the amount which the federal tax collectors demand as their share of every man's wages. All such efforts do some good, but not enough. When all wage earners are allowed to collect their full wages throughout the year and are then required at the end of the year to pay their own federal income tax in one sum, then and only then will all wage earners fully realize what the federal tax collectors are doing to them. A man who makes $5,000 a year and has 2 deductions for dependents can adjust himself to $12.80 withheld for federal income tax each week. But let him take all of his earnings home each week, and then at the end of the year, let him face the problem of raising $665.60 to pay his federal income tax. This would create chaos for the tax collectors and produce more tax delinquencies than the collectors could count. It would create widespread rebellion against oppressive federal taxes, and it would put the American people on the road to recapturing control of their own government. In 1962, United States Representative Bruce Alger introduced a bill to eliminate the withholding of income tax from wages and salaries, saying, quote, "We have lost all control over spending in this country. Since the great burden of taxes is borne by the so-called little or modest income folks, I think it is high time that they found out how much taxes they are paying. In order to do that, I think we ought to let them pay their own." End quote. Mr. Alger's bill died in committee because there was not enough public support. Failure of Congress to repeal the withholding law so that the mass of taxpayers will become conscious of federal taxes has stimulated private efforts to accomplish the same purpose. Mr. Norman Cotton, a businessman in San Francisco, contemplated a nationally organized effort at persuading all employers to go on strike against serving as unpaid tax collectors for the federal government. The idea was that if enough employers would refuse to withhold federal taxes from employees' wages, the withholding system would collapse. The federal government could prosecute every employer who thus refused to obey the unconstitutional withholding law and the rules and regulations of the Internal Revenue Service. But if enough employers stood firm and acted in unison, the federal government, unable to prosecute all, might not prosecute any, and the withholding law would be unenforceable. This idea was abandoned because of the extreme difficulty of getting enough businessmen to take the risk. As an alternative to this plan, Mr. Cotton has now organized an employers' union, hoping to get a national membership of at least 100,000 so that the organization will have enough strength to exert influence for proper tax legislation. Meanwhile, another immediately effective plan is already in operation. Federal regulations require employers to make a payment for the total of all federal taxes withheld from wages. The payment must be made once a month for all withholding during the month. Employers habitually prorate the monthly tax withholding so that the same amount is taken out each payday, and the employees thus never fully realize what it would be like to get full paychecks. In 1962, Mr. A.K. Summers, president of Premier Photo Service in Parkersburg, West Virginia, started collecting federal taxes only once a month. Mr. Summers says, quote, "Mrs. A, whose salary is $125 a week, under the system of weekly deductions, would draw $99.29 a week, and she just took it for granted that that was what she was making. Now, under our system of collecting, she draws $125 the first 3 weeks of the month, and the last week, $22.68. Now she realizes she pays in taxes almost a full week's pay out of a month." End quote. Some employees pay more than one full week's pay out of each month. Mr. Summers says that one of his $70 a week employees gets no check at all for the 4th week of each month and still owes the federal government $4.75 in taxes for that month. Once a month only withholding makes the biggest impression, of course, on employees who get a paycheck every week. But it has considerable impact on those who are paid only twice a month. I know because I use the plan for employees of the Dan Smoot report. In the middle of each month, every employee on my small staff receives a full salary check, nothing taken out. At the end of the month, he gets a dismally shrunken check, thanks to federal withholding. I agree emphatically with Mr. Summers. Our employees now realize that this wild federal spending is coming out of their pockets. The once-a-month-only withholding plan has such a startling and wholesome educational effect that a national organization is now working to persuade employers to adopt it. The organization is called SWAT, Stop Withholding All Taxes. All who order copies of this broadcast will get full particulars. I urge you to study this plan and others, and then use your influence to get a maximum number of employers to try it. If enough employers will participate, they can quickly arouse millions of wage earners about the federal income tax. When enough are aroused, there will be an irresistible demand for repeal of the income tax amendment. The federal income tax takes your money to nourish the forces which are sapping your freedom and destroying your republic. Repeal the income tax amendment, and you will help solve most of the major economic and political problems of our time. The quickest way to do that is to repeal the withholding law so that the mass taxpayers will know what they're paying. Goodbye. God bless you. For a printed copy of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 420. Stop Withholding. 6 copies, $1.